The worst part of going to a theme park is having to wait in line. You wait in 90-degree heat, often with very little shade, and having to endure being crowded into switchbacks with sweaty strangers for an hour, all for a 1-minute long ride. But what if there was a way to skip the lines and bypass all of the crowds without having to pay hundreds of dollars to buy skip the line passes? This video will detail the best ways to ensure that you get on every ride that you want to in the shortest amount of time possible. The best way to have short wait times is to go to a theme park on a weekday that is not during spring break or any other heavy attendance days. Obviously, this isn't possible for everyone, but wait times on a Saturday are at least twice as much as on a Tuesday. Even Sunday will have shorter wait times than a Saturday by a fair amount. If at all possible, just do not go on a Saturday, as you will spend almost all of your time waiting in masses of people. I also use this website, qtimes.com, to help me choose what days to go to parks. It has a calendar that uses historical data to predict how busy the park will be on a certain day. I find it to be a useful resource. It's not perfect, but as a general rule, it is a pretty good predictor of the crowd levels for a certain day. Also, if you can help it, maybe try to go on a cold, more cloudy day because poor weather really drives out crowds. Rain isn't even necessarily a bad thing because it can really lead to parks clearing out. Parks won't always operate their coasters in inclement weather, but even if they don't, once the weather clears away, most of the crowds will have already left the park. Another way to avoid crowds is to plan before you go to the park. Having a plan will eliminate time spent standing around in midways trying to figure out what to do next, especially in the morning. Find a park map so you know where you're going when you're in the park and don't get lost. Also, plan what rides are most important to you and the ones that you don't need to go on. This will help you avoid waiting in lines that you don't need to. Even if a ride looks really good and has a short line, make sure that you decide if you actually want to go on it before you get to the park so that you don't waste your time on it. Getting to the park in advance of opening is a great way to save time. Remember that you also have to park, unless you're walking, and then also go through security and have your tickets scanned. All this will take some extra time. Opening is usually when the crowds are the lowest and the lines will be very minimal, especially in the back. Assuming you get to the park before opening, don't go for the big rides in the front, make your way to the middle and back of the park. Most people will be attracted to the big coaster at the front, but don't fall for spectacle. Even if the rides in the front have minimal wait, don't ride them yet. A huge example of this is Canobie at Hershey Park. The rides in the middle and back will have almost no wait because everyone will be in the front. When we went to Cedar Point, for example, we went on Raptor, then Millennium Force, and Steel Vengeance right away in the morning and probably waited a combined 20 minutes. This was on a fairly busy day at the park as well. Utilizing a park app will also be a huge help throughout the day. Almost all parks have an app you can download which will give wait times for all their major attractions. And so using this, you can, at a glance, get a picture for which attractions have some really long lines and where the crowds are in the park. So this is definitely some valuable data for you to use as you try to outmaneuver the crowds. You also want to research which rides get really long lines and have bad capacity because those are the ones you want to ride first. At a park like Universal's Islands of Adventure, you'll want to ride Velocicoaster or Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure first because those rides will get really long lines. At a park with a flying coaster, you might want to hit that first because it will have very slow dispatches, meaning the line never really gets any shorter. Another thing to research is what rides break down a lot. Riding those first is even more important than riding coasters that get long lines because they could break down and you may not even be able to ride them at all. At Dollywood, Lightning Rod is a ride that tends to have trouble staying open, so that is a ride you want to ride first. At Hershey Park, Storm Runner usually gets long lines and doesn't have good reliability, so it would be a good idea to ride it first. In general, launch coasters tend to be the most unreliable coasters because of how complicated those systems are. Towards the middle of the day, the crowds will start to increase and move to the back. At this point in the day, it starts to get kind of hard to not wait in long lines unless you are visiting on a weekday with poor weather. This is when you may want to move to the front and make sure you get those rides in. Remember that this is the time of day when you will have to wait in the longest lines no matter what section of the park you are in. At night, people will start leaving and the crowds will thin out again. In most cases, you can ride pretty much any ride that you want re-rides on. The best rides will have the longest lines by far, as everyone wants to get on their favorite ride at the end. So if you really don't want to wait in lines, then just go on the bad rides. If you've already done everything, then going on whatever ride you want is the best thing to do, no matter how long the line is. The back will probably be empty at night because people will try to leave around park closing, unless you're at a park like Cedar Point because the two best rides in the park are located in the back. At almost every park, once you're in line for a coaster, they will not kick you out, even if it is like 45 minutes after closing. So to maximize your time, if a park closes at 10 o'clock for example, try to get in line for your last coaster of the day at around 9:50 or 9:55. Eating at normal hours is also a major time killer. Usually around 12:30 to 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock are the most busy times for restaurants, so try to avoid eating at those times. I usually eat one meal in the park at around 3 o'clock or so when everyone else is riding coasters. You can also save money by only eating one meal in the park instead of two, and if you do this, there will be less time waiting around in line for food and eating when you can instead be waiting in line to ride roller coasters. Sometimes, however, all these measures will not be enough. The park will be slammed and lines will be long no matter what. This is when you might want to consider purchasing a skip the line pass. At Cedar Fair parks it's called Fast Lane, at Six Flags it's called Flash Pass, and various other parks all have their names for it. I recommend typically not buying a skip the line pass in advance because the price will usually be the same in the park as it was online. This differs from standard admissions tickets, which are almost always cheaper to buy in advance online. However, because crowd sizes are, at the end of the day, almost impossible to perfectly predict, I recommend not buying a skip the line pass unless you get to the park and determine that you need it, then buying it at the park. If you buy a skip the line pass in advance online, you might end up not even needing it if crowds end up being smaller than you expected. If that is the case, then you just end up buying the skip the line pass for basically no reason, and so that just ends up being wasted money. So that's why I don't recommend buying a skip the line pass in advance. One extra tip that I'll add is that once you're in line for a ride, don't get out, even if the ride breaks down. Most times it will only be about an extra 15 minutes and most people will get out of line, so when the ride does reopen, you won't have to wait near as long. This applies most of the time, but sometimes the park will clear the queue and make you get out of line. If this happens, just get out of line and find another ride to go on. Overall, there are a lot of different methods you can use to avoid and outmaneuver crowds at theme parks. Simply planning ahead, going to the back first, and using other tricks that we mentioned will all help you to get as many rides as possible in one day on your favorite attractions. If you have any thoughts on this video or have anything else to add, let us know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.